Did you know there are islands on Earth that literally did not exist until recently? And I'm not talking about islands that have been there for centuries, only hidden from maps. I mean islands that were actually born within modern history. Welcome to a list of the youngest islands on Earth. Every island on this list came into existence in a completely different way. And as the list goes on, the stories surrounding their creation become more and more unbelievable. Island number 9 on this list, located in Bangladesh, was not created by a volcano at all. And today, hundreds of thousands of refugees from another part of Asia call this place home. Number 6 appeared after a massive earthquake in Pakistan, shocked the world, and then slowly began disappearing back into the sea. Number 4 is an island whose land is the youngest on Earth, and it still hasn't stopped growing. And the final island on this list appeared out of nowhere in the Mediterranean, only for multiple countries to rush in and try to claim it. But for now, let's start with island number 10, an island that may be the most famous newborn island on Earth. Because when it appeared off the coast of Iceland, scientists realized they were watching something incredibly rare, a brand new piece of land rising straight out of the ocean. Surtsey is one of the rare places on Earth where humans literally watched a new island being born. In November 1963, fishermen off the southern coast of Iceland noticed dark smoke rising from the sea. At first, some thought a ship was burning, but what they were actually seeing was a volcanic eruption punching through the ocean floor. For the next 3.5 years, magma and seawater collided in violent explosions, launching ash, steam, and black volcanic debris high into the air. The eruption was so distinctive that scientists eventually named this entire style of eruption after the island itself, Surtseyan. By the time it ended in 1967, Surtsey had become a real island, covering about 2.6 square kilometers, or 1 square mile, with its highest point reaching roughly 155 meters, or 509 feet above sea level. But the reason Surtsey became famous is not just because it appeared in modern history. It's because Iceland did something almost no country would ever do with a brand new island. They basically turned it into a giant scientific experiment. Access was heavily restricted almost immediately, with only scientists allowed to land there because researchers realized this was a once-in-human-history opportunity, a completely sterile piece of land, built from fresh volcanic rock, where they could watch life arrive from absolute zero. In other words, Surtsey became a real-life petri dish the size of an island. Scientists tracked everything: the first seeds carried by wind, the first seabirds landing on the cliffs, the first nests, the first patches of moss and hardy coastal plants slowly taking hold in the ash and lava. Over time, birds like gulls, fulmars, and puffins began nesting there, and their droppings actually helped fertilize the soil, making it easier for more plant life to spread. That is what makes Surtsey so incredible. It is not just a new island. It is one of the only places on Earth where scientists got to watch an ecosystem build itself almost from scratch, step by step, in real time. And maybe the best part is that many geologists originally thought the North Atlantic would destroy it within a few years. Instead, more than 60 years later, Surtsey is still standing, not just as a new island, but as one of the greatest real-life experiments in Earth science ever created. From a brand new island born in the North Atlantic, we go to one that appeared in a completely different part of the world, and in a completely different way. What began as a blank patch of new land in the Bay of Bengal would eventually become home to hundreds of thousands of people, and that alone makes it one of the strangest islands on this entire list. This is island number 9. Bhasan Char is one of the most unusual islands on this list, not because of how it formed, but because of what humans built on it almost immediately. This island sits in the Bay of Bengal, near the mouth of the Meghna River Delta, where some of the most powerful rivers on Earth constantly dump huge amounts of mud and sediment into the sea. Over time, that material began building up on a shallow shoal, until within roughly the last 2 decades, a new island started taking recognizable shape. What had once been open water slowly became real land. That alone is fascinating, because unlike Surtsey, Bhasan Char was not born in fire. It emerged gradually, almost silently, through the same natural forces that have been redrawing the coastline of Bangladesh for centuries, and it is still changing. Because this is fresh delta land, not ancient bedrock, the island's size has fluctuated dramatically in recent years. Its coastlines shift, its edges erode, and its exact shape can change depending on tides, storms, and seasonal flooding. In other words, Bhasan Char is still young enough that the sea is still negotiating with it. But what made Bhasan Char internationally famous was not geology. It was the fact that Bangladesh decided to build an enormous settlement there for Rohingya refugees, a Muslim minority from neighboring Myanmar who were forced to flee after a brutal military crackdown and mass displacement that sent huge numbers across the border into Bangladesh. Many ended up in overcrowded camps, creating one of the largest refugee crises in the world. So in 2020, Bangladesh began relocating people to this brand new island, and not just a few. They built housing blocks, roads, embankments, flood barriers, cyclone shelters, mosques, and infrastructure on land that barely existed on older maps. The scale is so large that the settlement is clearly visible from satellite imagery, where what was once just a muddy tidal flat now looks like a geometric grid carved into fresh sediment. Today, more than 100,000 people have been moved there. That means one of the newest islands on Earth did not become a scientific experiment or a temporary curiosity. It became home to an entire displaced population. On land so young, it is still being shaped by the same waters that created it. From a newborn island built slowly by rivers and sediment, we go to one that very recently exploded into existence in the middle of the Pacific. It was tracked from space, studied by scientists around the world, and for a while, it looked like one of the most important new islands of the modern era. This is island number 8. Hunga Tonga, Hunga Haʻapai, was one of the most spectacular new islands of the modern satellite era because the entire world got to watch it appear almost in real time. In late 2014, deep in the South Pacific, an undersea volcano in Tonga suddenly erupted between two older islands called Hunga Tonga and Hunga Haʻapai. At first, it looked like a huge column of ash and steam rising straight out of the ocean. But over the next few weeks, something much more interesting started to happen. Instead of fading away, the eruption kept piling up ash, rock, and volcanic debris until a completely new landmass began forming between those two older islands, physically joining them together into one. By early 2015, what had been open water had become a brand new island, with the volcanic cone reaching the roughly 120 meters, or about 394 feet above sea level. And because this happened in the modern era, scientists were able to track almost everything from space. Satellite images captured the island as it grew, changed shape, and slowly stabilized. At first, many experts thought it would disappear almost immediately. That made sense. New volcanic islands made mostly of loose ash often get destroyed by waves in months, sometimes even weeks. But Hunga Tonga refused to behave the way it was supposed to. Instead of vanishing, it held together. A crater lake formed inside it. Waves carved into its edges. Sandbars began to develop. And researchers studying the island through NASA imagery realized this was turning into something far more important than a short-lived eruption. For a while, it became one of the most closely watched newborn islands on Earth because it was one of the first of its kind to be studied this extensively by satellites from the very beginning. But the story of Hunga Tonga Hunga Haʻapai also came with a brutal reminder, because in 2022, the same volcanic system produced one of the most violent eruptions of the 21st century, and much of the island that had fascinated scientists was blown apart again. From an island that shocked the world with one giant eruption, we go to one that keeps doing it again and again. This next island doesn't just appear once and stay the same. It erupts, grows, shrinks, and then comes back again, making it one of the most unpredictable young islands anywhere on Earth. This is island number 7. Home Reef is one of the best reminders that the Earth is still making new islands right now, because this is not a one-time event. It keeps coming back. This submarine volcano sits in the Tonga Island Arc, in one of the most volcanically active parts of the Pacific. Most of the time, it stays hidden below the ocean surface. But every so often, it reawakens, and when it does, a new island starts building itself above the water again. That is exactly what happened in 2022, when Home Reef erupted and pushed fresh volcanic material high enough to break the surface. For a while, a small new island appeared where there had been open ocean before. Then, as waves and erosion started attacking it, parts of that new land began shrinking again, and then it happened again. By late 2025 into early 2026, Home Reef entered another eruptive phase, with satellite sensors detecting fresh volcanic activity in December 2025. This time, new lava flows and eruptive debris expanded the island even further. From satellite images, you can literally watch the shape change from one eruption to the next. Fresh gray land extends outward. Plumes discolor the surrounding water. New edges form, then get cut back again. It looks less like a stable island and more like the ocean and the volcano are fighting over the same patch of ground. It may not be the biggest or most famous island here, but it is one of the clearest examples that even in the 2020s, the planet is still actively building new land, almost in real time. From an island that keeps coming back, we go to one that was not built by lava at all, but by something else entirely. It appeared suddenly after a massive earthquake, drew global attention almost overnight, and for a moment looked like a brand new island had just been born. But this one was something very different. This is island number 6. Zalzala Koh is one of the strangest islands on this list because what looked like a brand new island rising from the sea was actually more like the earth burping. In September 2013, a powerful magnitude 7.7 earthquake struck southwestern Pakistan, killing hundreds of people and shaking the region so violently that something bizarre happened off the coast, near Gwadar. A new island suddenly appeared in the Arabian Sea. Witnesses described a mound of fresh land rising out of the water almost immediately after the quake. News crews rushed to film it. Locals took boats out to see it for themselves. And for a moment, it looked like Pakistan had just gained a brand new island overnight. It was quickly named Zalzala Koh, which basically means Earthquake Island. At first glance, it looked real enough. The new island stood roughly 20 meters, or about 65 feet high, and stretched around 100 meters by 300 meters, or roughly 328 by 984 feet. From a distance, it looked like a gray, cone-shaped lump of land that had simply been pushed out of the ocean floor. But here is the twist. Zalzala Koh was not a volcanic island at all. It was most likely a mud volcano, created when the earthquake forced pressurized mud, gas, and soft sediments upward through weak points beneath the seafloor. In other words, this was not solid new rock like Surtsey. It was more like a temporary plug of sludge, debris, and gas that had been violently squeezed to the surface. And that is why its story moved so fast. Almost as soon as it appeared, the sea started tearing it apart. Scientists already knew that these kinds of mud volcanic islands can come and go quickly, and Zalzala Koh followed that pattern almost perfectly. Within months, it had already begun shrinking. By 2016, satellite images showed it was almost completely gone, with little more than shallow disturbed water and residual vents left behind. For a brief moment, it looked like a brand new island had been born after one of the region's most powerful earthquakes, but in reality, it was a temporary geological illusion, and the ocean erased it almost as quickly as it arrived. From an island created by an earthquake off Pakistan, we go to a place most people have never even heard of, where the Red Sea itself started making new islands. This next story is not about one eruption, but two, and both happened in one of the most overlooked volcanic regions on Earth. This is island number 5. The Zubair Archipelago might be one of the least famous places on this list, but in the early 2000s, it suddenly became one of the few places on Earth where scientists watched entirely new islands appear in the middle of the Red Sea. This remote volcanic chain lies between Yemen and Eritrea, in a part of the world most people would never associate with newborn islands. But beneath the surface, this area sits along the tectonic boundary, where the Arabian Plate and the African Plate are slowly pulling apart. And in late 2011, that hidden geology finally showed itself. After a swarm of earthquakes, a submarine eruption began in the southern Red Sea. Satellite images soon captured ash, steam, and dark volcanic material breaking the surface, and by early 2012, a brand new island had formed. It became known as Sholen. It was small, but very real. New land had just appeared in one of the most unexpected places on Earth. And then, incredibly, it happened again. In 2013, another eruption roughly 5 miles away created a second island known as Jadid. This one grew even larger, briefly reaching around 0.7 square kilometers, or about 0.3 square miles, before waves began cutting into it. That is what makes this story so good. Not only did the Red Sea suddenly produce one new island, it produced two in back-to-back eruptions, in a region so remote and overlooked that most people never even heard about it. From a forgotten volcanic chain in the Red Sea, we go to one of the clearest examples of a new island that just kept growing, and never really stopped. Because this next island did not simply appear and then settle down. It kept expanding, rewriting its own coastline again and again, until the line between old land and new land almost disappeared. This is island number 4. Nishinoshima is one of the most fascinating islands on this list because it is not just a young island, it is an island whose newest land is some of the youngest on the entire planet. This small volcanic island lies far south of Japan, in the Pacific Ocean, and for a long time it was little more than a remote, mostly forgotten speck in the sea. But in November 2013, that changed dramatically. A new volcanic vent suddenly erupted just offshore. At first, it created what looked like a separate tiny island beside the older Nishinoshima, with fresh black lava and ash rising above the water where there had been nothing before. Early aerial photos made it look almost modest. Just a small cone, maybe temporary, maybe destined to be destroyed by waves like so many other newborn islands. But that is not what happened. Instead, the eruption kept going. The new land rapidly expanded, and before long it merged with the original island, turning what had started as a separate volcanic birth into something much more unusual, an island that was actively rebuilding itself in front of modern cameras and satellites. While other islands here appeared dramatically and then began eroding, Nishinoshima kept doing the opposite. It kept getting bigger. By the years after the eruption began, what had once been a tiny Pacific island had expanded into a much larger volcanic landmass, with repeated eruptions adding more and more territory. And that is what makes Nishinoshima so special. It is an island where some of the youngest land on Earth is still being created, layer by layer, with major new land added in 2020, and renewed activity again in 2023. From an island that keeps building some of the youngest land on Earth, we go to one of the most famous volcanic children in history, because this next island was born in the shadow of one of the most catastrophic eruptions the modern world has ever seen, and even after nearly a century above the water, it still has not stopped reminding people how unstable a young island can be. This is island number 3. Anak Krakatau is one of the most famous young islands on Earth because it was born from the ruins of one of the most infamous eruptions in human history. In 1883, the original Krakatoa volcano exploded so violently that it destroyed most of the island, triggered massive tsunamis, and killed tens of thousands of people. It was one of the most catastrophic volcanic events ever recorded, and for a while, it looked like that part of Indonesia has been permanently erased. But the volcano was not finished. In 1927, sailors and observers began noticing something remarkable in the middle of the old caldera. New volcanic material was rising back above the water. At first, the new land appeared, collapsed, and reappeared more than once, almost as if the volcano was struggling to rebuild itself. Then by 1930, it had emerged permanently. That new island became known as Anak Krakatau, which literally means child of Krakatoa. And that name could not be more fitting. Because for decades, Anak Krakatau kept growing upward from the sea, layer by layer, through repeated eruptions, it became one of the clearest examples of how a volcano can destroy an island, and then slowly build a new one in the exact same place. In 2018, part of the volcano's flank suddenly collapsed into the sea, triggering a deadly tsunami that hit nearby coastlines in Indonesia. In other words, this island was not just a survivor of one of history's most famous eruptions. It was still actively creating disasters of its own more than a century later. From one of the most famous volcanic islands on Earth, we go to one that became an island for a completely different reason, and only very recently, because this next one was not created by an eruption, an earthquake, or rising magma. It became an island because the ice around it disappeared. This is island number 2. Prow Knob is one of the most unusual islands on this list because no new land was created here at all. Instead, this place became an island because the landscape around it changed so dramatically that a piece of land that used to be connected suddenly wasn't anymore. Prow Knob is located in southeastern Alaska near the Alsek Glacier in a region where glaciers, meltwater, and shifting lakes are constantly reshaping the terrain. For a long time, this rocky hill was effectively attached to the surrounding glacier system. It was not standing out as a true island in open water. But in 2025, that changed. As the glacier retreated, meltwater expanded the nearby Alsek Lake enough to fully cut Prow Knob off from the land around it. Satellite imagery revealed that what had once been connected through ice and glacial terrain was now completely surrounded by water. In other words, Prow Knob had quietly become a brand new island, and that is what makes it such a strange fit for this list. It is a much quieter story than the others, but in some ways, that makes it even more interesting, because Prow Knob may be one of the clearest examples that on a changing planet, even an island can be born simply because everything around it vanished. From one of the newest islands on Earth, we end with one of the most famous islands that refused to stay. Because this final island appeared in the middle of the Mediterranean, triggered an international scramble almost immediately, and then vanished again before the year was even over. This is island number 1. Ferdinandea might be the most legendary island on this entire list, because the moment it appeared, multiple countries rushed to claim it before it even had time to cool. In the summer of 1831, sailors in the Sicily Channel, between Sicily and North Africa, began reporting something strange. The sea was bubbling, the water was discolored, smoke and ash were rising from the surface. Then, in early July 1831, a brand new island broke above the water. This was the result of a submarine volcanic eruption, and for a brief moment, it looked like the Mediterranean had just gained a new permanent island. And almost immediately, the political chaos began. The British claimed it and called it Graham Island. The Kingdom of the Two Sicilies claimed it and called it Ferdinandea. The French had their own name for it too. Even Spain showed interest. In other words, within weeks, this blank patch of newborn volcanic rock had become an international territorial argument in the middle of the Mediterranean. Most new islands spend their first months being studied by geologists. This one spent its first months being fought over, but nature ended the argument fast, because the island had formed from loose volcanic material in rough water. And by December 1831, just a few months after it appeared, winter waves had already torn it back down beneath the surface. The island was gone. It disappeared so quickly that the people fighting over it were left arguing over open water, and today, even though the island itself is gone, Ferdinandea has not completely disappeared. Because if you dive beneath the surface, in that same part of the Sicily Channel, you can still find the submerged remains of the volcano. The broken remains of Ferdinandea are still there, and that is all that is left of it. And after all of that, which one of those islands feels the most unbelievable to you? Let me know in the comments. If you enjoyed this video, please leave a like and subscribe. Also check out my other stuff. Thanks for watching.